We all know the feeling. You're about to sit down for a job interview, an exam, or go on a date, and your adrenaline surges. Your heart races. You feel a sense of dread. We all experience anxiety. But what causes it? Why do we feel this way? And what's the best way to deal with it? Anxiety is a natural emotion, but for some, it can develop into a debilitating disorder. And that may mean you'll need some professional help. In fact, disorders are quite common. 1 in 4 Australians will experience one at some stage in their lives. But anxiety itself is not a bad thing. It actually serves a very important purpose: to keep us safe.
From a very basic evolutionary perspective, it was the sense that kept us alive. It really said, hey, look, predator, or look, snake in the grass. It helped us both see danger, but also prepare for it.
That's a pretty useful response, but anxiety often doesn't feel good. So what's happening in our bodies when we're feeling anxious? To understand that, we need to look at the oldest part of the brain, the limbic system, which is responsible for emotions such as fear. Inside is an almond-shaped cluster of cells called the amygdala. It functions as the brain's watchman, on the lookout for threats and danger. And we've used it for millions of years, particularly if we're in physical danger, when, say, an animal like a crocodile attacks. The amygdala triggers changes to the mind and body and prepares to fight or flee. The nervous system is flooded with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, putting us in a high state of alert. Muscles tense, breathing quickens, and senses sharpen. Blood is directed towards vital organs, while some bodily functions like digestion are shut down. All this makes you faster and stronger, giving you the best chance to survive. These physical reactions are all very helpful if you need to run away from a crocodile. But they're less useful in, say, a job interview. And they're a problem if the threats are perceived but not real. These anxious feelings are more than fear, which is a reaction to immediate danger that quickly subsides. Anxiety is a reaction to uncertainty, and it makes us worry about the future.
Anxiety is more like you feel afraid, but in a remote, dangerous setting. So it's remote in the sense that, in space and time, you don't know where it is. You don't know when it's occurring, but you're afraid anyway.
Now, the brain has ways of assessing just how serious the danger is before going into fight or flight mode. The parts of the brain involved in high-level thinking and in learning and memory regulate the perception of threats. If you see a crocodile at a zoo, they reassure your amygdala that you are safe. But if you have anxiety, that might not happen.
In the anxious brain, what happens is that ability to calm down is no longer as effective. So what happens is that stress hormones continue to be released, and that reactivates a circuit, and thereby things that are no longer threatening seem to be threatening.
These days, we're far less likely to come face to face with a predator in the wild. But modern stresses like an exam or public speaking can activate that same fear circuitry.
I think we just have a lot more to be scared about now. I think if you're thinking about it, it's not just predators, but it's the job, it's the house, it's the stock market. We have so many things to be able to worry about now that our brain can just constantly be chewing on things and constantly be chronically anxious.
Now, it's important to note that anxiety is not just stress. They are related, but not the same. Stress is typically caused by an external trigger, such as a looming deadline, and it's usually temporary, whereas anxiety lingers, even in the absence of whatever triggered it.
When we are thinking about stress, we are thinking about things which are just too big for our normal coping resources. Anxiety is a little bit different because it's actually a sense of danger and a sense of what if. So it's not just this big feeling of I can't cope, but there's a sense that bad things could happen.
So when does anxiety, that's a normal part of life, become a disorder? Only a professional can diagnose it, but there are some things to look out for. Common physical symptoms include panic attacks, increased heart rate, shortness of breath, insomnia and fatigue. Among the psychological symptoms are excessive fear or worry, obsessive thinking, catastrophizing, irritability, and poor concentration. And in terms of your behaviour, you might avoid situations or places, or use alcohol or drugs in an attempt to build confidence. Ultimately, it's about how you are coping, whether anxiety is interfering with your everyday life, at work, school, in your relationships or social life.
So for a clinical diagnosis of a anxiety disorder, there are a couple of things that we actually look for. So the first would be what we call functional impairment, where you can't do the things you need to do to be able to live your life well. The second would be clinically significant distress. So really you are feeling distressed and you can't cope.
Anxiety disorders are a family of related conditions, including generalised anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, specific phobias, and panic disorder. Anxiety is also often present in obsessive compulsive disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. And it frequently occurs alongside other mental health conditions, particularly depression. And while there's no blood test that you can take to diagnose anxiety disorders, they all have real impacts on your body and can actually affect the structure and functioning of your brain.
So in anxiety there are changes in brain chemicals, but importantly there are changes in brain circuits. So some brain circuits that are responsible for detecting and responding to threats are actually overactivated, while other brain circuits that are important for assessing and deciding whether to respond to a fear or threat are actually underactivated, suggesting that what that means is that you're left in a situation whereby you're no longer able to detect whether something is safe or not.
In individuals with an anxiety disorder, the amygdala can actually grow larger and more sensitive. There can be reduced communication within the brain, and you are more likely to hold on to negative emotions instead of positive ones. Short-term memory can be impacted, as well as the ability to learn and your sense of smell. Much of this can be observed in functional brain imaging, where people are shown anxiety-provoking images. So are some people more likely to experience an anxiety disorder? Well, it's important to emphasise they can happen to anyone, and they don't signify personal failure or weakness.
Anxiety, just like physical health conditions, results from biological changes in the body, and in this case it happens to be the brain. So it's really important that we try and see these conditions for what they are, reduce the stigma and address these like we would all physical health conditions.
And while anxiety disorders don't have any one cause, there are risk factors. They're the most common mental health disorders in young people and often start in childhood. In fact, half of all adults who have a disorder were diagnosed as children. Women are twice as likely to be affected. 1 in 3 experience an anxiety condition at some point, compared to 1 in 5 men. Genetics also play a role, as do your life experiences, such as your upbringing, any trauma you've suffered, and your lifestyle.
Anxiety, it does have a certain heritability, so really it is at least partially passed down genetically, but then we've also got nurture. So all of the stuff which does happen to us as we are growing up, parenting, parents who are anxious, experiences at school, bullying, traumas, all of those things are going to come together.
Are anxiety disorders preventable? Well, they all develop from forms of everyday anxiety. And fortunately, there are things we can all do to manage this. Starting with the basics. Eating well, getting enough sleep and exercise, social connections with family and friends are also very important. And things like mindfulness can help with relaxation and can help dampen the fight or flight response.
Mindfulness exercises like, for instance, breathing can be very, very helpful with helping us calm down, giving our brain calming signals so we aren't in that constant fight or flight space. It really also cues us to try and get away from the noisy chatter in our brains, which is often what does drive anxiety.
Approaching our mental health like our physical health as something that needs to be maintained and promoted is also important.
There does seem to be a real sense of general helplessness when we are feeling anxious. There's a sense that I can't cope, I have to go and see a psychologist, instead of maybe thinking about the things which we might be doing that might actually contribute to us feeling anxious sometimes.
But the goal shouldn't be avoiding anxiety altogether. In fact, the more you try and avoid it, the stronger it becomes.
So for example, if you are scared of driving, each time you then choose to not get into a car, you're probably going to feel this strong sense of relief, which is actually a little bit like a drug for your brain. What that effectively does is then gives your brain the signal that this is a good thing to be scared of, and so you just learn to become more and more scared of driving.
So the best thing you can do is to face your fears in a graded and safe way, making new memories with new experiences to help your brain learn that it doesn't have to activate the fight or flight response.
The brain is very, very good at updating itself. But if we don't give that source, we don't give that new experience, then it's always going to cling on to that one memory.
Even if anxiety isn't pleasant, it really helps to think about it differently by focusing on how it helps us. For example, by motivating us to study for that exam.
Listening to it can be helpful sometimes because it does actually cue us that there is something to watch out for.
So how can you tell when you might need professional help? If you are really struggling, or if you find yourself avoiding more and more situations, it could be time to seek treatment. Fortunately, anxiety is treatable.
It's certainly one of the far easier psychological conditions to be able to treat. We can actually recover from it really well, or at least try to manage it so it doesn't impact on our daily functioning.
There are a range of effective treatments. Psychological therapies like cognitive behavioural therapy can help change your thinking patterns. You can learn how to accept things rather than avoid them. And medications can also help correct chemical imbalances in the brain.
Medication can be extremely helpful for anxiety, especially if you are talking about anxiety which is at the pointier end. Thinking of it a little bit like a crutch for a broken leg, it really just helps us move through life while we are learning to walk again.
It's a matter of finding what works for you. And seeking help is not just about addressing anxiety itself, it's also about your health overall. Chronic exposure to stress hormones like cortisol can contribute to weight gain, a loss of libido, headaches, fatigue. Even your immune system can be affected. Anxiety disorders can also increase your blood pressure and the risk of heart disease. But the good news is the human brain has the lifelong ability to change itself.
So the brain has this incredible capacity to be able to rewire and grow new connections. And the thing we know with anxiety is that given the right appropriate treatment, there is a way that you can actually change those connections in the brain in order to manage your symptoms better. So there is always hope.
So if you think you need help with anxiety, don't suffer in silence. There are a range of free online and phone services, or speak to a GP. And remember, anxiety is normal. And if you have a disorder, it's not a personal failing or weakness. It's a health issue, just like diabetes. And as with any health problem, getting the right treatment could be life-changing.